So my first question for you is, what type of experience do you have with Verdi, and how do you feel about his work in general?
My experience, first of all, as a conductor, I have conducted both Rigoletto and I have conducted La Traviata. Trovatore, I have not conducted. However, I did work with it extensively with Maestro Coppola. One of the best ways a person can get to know a style is to work with a great conductor, as a rehearsal pianist, as a chorus master. And Trovatore is one of the operas I've had the great pleasure with working with Maestro Coppola. So I feel very well equipped, shall we say. And Verdi, it's very dramatic. There is a lot. I'm a very big fan of great singing. There are a lot of opportunities for great singing in the opera. All of his operas, quite frankly, although because he composed for such a long period of time and was a transitional composer, his style shifted quite a bit. I would say he and Mozart, you have to throw Puccini in there as well, but he and Mozart are probably my two favorite composers because the music and the drama fit so well hand in hand.
And Verdi is known to have these kind of three periods. And so what is the difference, do you think, between those different periods of his work?
That is such a good question because there's so much debate about what those three periods are. Probably most clearly is where he would stop with the first period. And the first period, he was writing operas that dealt with large kingdoms, wars, and see, because Verdi was writing, when he began writing, he was writing into his middle period during the Risorgimento, which is the unification period, unification of Italy. Europe, as of the late 1940s, was going through all sorts of revolutions. They didn't all have to do with each other. There were 50 different countries. Italy's was the Risorgimento, the unification period. And so during that first period where Verdi was writing, and his middle period went into the Risorgimento period as well, he was writing very big, I would call them very directly political operas. Verdi was he was a politician, actually. He was very pro-democracy during all of this Risorgimento. And he even wrote, one of his most famous pieces is Val Pensiero from his very early opera, Nabucco, which became a huge hit with the GP, you call it today, the general population, because it was
That's one of my favorites.
Yeah, well, it's beautiful, first of all, and it's so pro freedom, pro democracy. You know, release us from the shackles of the monarchies. Was the implication? Although he did not write directly of the period in which he was living, the references were still there. The middle period, interesting things happening in the middle period. First of all, during a lot of the middle period, he was having, I don't want to even say an affair. It was just kind of scandalous because he was living with this very famous soprano at the time, having this somewhat scandalous love affair and live-in situation, unmarried, with this singer, Strepponi was her name. And his operas that he was writing, there was more emphasis on this either wronged woman who was involved in some sort of salacious sexual circumstance. The leading ladies in that middle period, I believe, were affected by the fact that he was having this love affair.
So this work would have come out during what period for Verdi? Would it have fallen in about his middle period? And do you think that the content of the show, there's a lot of things that happen off stage but are spoken about in the work, some burning at the stakes and things like that. Do you think that that was salacious for the time, or it was known of Verdi's work to be very off the cuff at times?
It depends on who you would have asked. The audiences loved it. Trovatore, it's a grotesque story with all sorts of weird plot twists. Audiences were not unfamiliar with grotesque things happening on the stage. And Rigoletto right before it, so Trovatore came right in between Rigoletto and Traviata, although he was working on them all kind of at the same time. It was a huge hit, and yet, you know, you had a person killed in front of your very own eyes in the last scene, Gilda, and then dragged across the stage in a sack. You know, I mean, that's pretty, you know, that's pretty wild. I think with Trovatore, immolations also were not an unusual thing either. At the end of Norma, Bellini's Norma, the two leading characters go off to the funeral pyre. But I think what was probably the most potentially scandalous and something you just can't really show on the stage is the whole notion of a baby being thrown into the fire. I mean, okay, so the mother of Alzucena throwing the wrong baby into a fire, two people in a fire. There, of course, there were duels and there's bloodiness, but that wasn't happening on the stage. They were used to duels, so that was okay. Now, who was not really a big fan were the critics and members of the aristocracy. First of all, if you go back one opera with Rigoletto, it did not go over well with the censors, the whole idea, because you were talking about royalty or being awful people.
So very bad press for them.
Very bad, very bad, very good, very bad press. But the audiences, they loved it. I mean, Trovatore was a huge success. I mean, of course, Verdi was very popular at that point anyway, because he was such a political hero and a hero as a composer. But yeah, the audiences, yes. Critics and the highbrows, no, not so much.
Not so much. So at the time when this work would have premiered, what was the difference between the opera houses then and the opera houses now? I mean, I imagine that they would have been a lot smaller. So when vocalists are performing, is it different now to perform those works? And is the musicality different because you're now in a venue that has 3,500 seats as opposed to maybe one that has only 700?
Well, that is a big part of it, absolutely. Now, you know, any great hall that is large will have terrific acoustics. So, however, you need voices that, not necessarily huge voices, but voices that have been trained to project through a long distance. Also, you have to remember the acoustics of the instruments that were being played early on were not as resonant. I mean, all the stringed instruments, all the brass instruments, these instruments became more sophisticated and in many ways louder. And so singing over that was also an issue. Singers back then too they had a different kind of training. Singers today are trained to have great techniques, but back then there was a lot more focus on technique, you know, so, and less maybe so much focus on the acting skills and other aspects of the opera. So in a sense, I mean, there are great singers today, please don't get me wrong. It's, you know, we have amazing voices today, but there was more of a focus on the singer. And also, singers back then, they didn't have the same kind of, this is going to sound weird, but travel schedules. This is before the jet age, where a really busy singer could, take Birgit Nilsson, for instance, great soprano. She could technically sing on the East Coast a performance of Salome, which is an hour and a half long, and then fly for a matinee, then fly to the West Coast and perform Turandot. So there, because of the speed of travel, there was also greater demand on on the singers, whereas before, because travel was so slow, they had more time to rest their voices. They're really busy singers.
Trovatore premiered in 1853, which is categorized as the bel canto period. So what does that mean, and how does that influence how that work might be performed or produced?
Well, so let me begin with the whole notion of bel canto. Bel canto literally means beautiful singing. It's often ascribed to a form, a musical form, usually a slow section, and then a fast section. There's a cavatina and a cabaletta. The bel canto composers, the first composers usually believed to be the bel canto, great Italian bel canto composers were Rossini, Bellini, and Donizetti. So, and Verdi was actually overlapped. They were composing at the same time. Or Verdi was a little later. Of course, Verdi, lived to be 88 years old. So he was composing when Puccini was alive.
Very odd for the time as well for him to live so long.
Well, almost 88. Yeah. So that's very very old. So was Trovatore a bel canto opera? Interesting that you should ask. He wrote a lot in that style. A lot of those same formulas, big choruses to open the opera, and then a lot of set trios and ensembles that you could literally take out of the opera and do as a concert number. Whereas later on in his life, when he wrote Otello and a lot of Aida and a lot of the later pieces, it was more through composed. So there was not necessarily always a definite beginning and a definite ending of an aria or an ensemble. Verdi did not want originally Trovatore to be a bel canto opera. In fact, he requested that of his librettist. It did turn out to be quite that. So that if you think about the beauty of the voice, you also have to think that the orchestra, the accompaniment, recedes a little bit in importance. Take from Norma. Bellini was considered maybe the most beautiful writers of melody in the bel canto style or period. So Casta Diva from Norma, you have a very simple accompaniment. Now the fourth act, Leonora, the soprano, her fourth act aria. And notice that little descending scale. So bel canto means beautiful line. Orchestra not quite as important.
It's more lyrical in a sense.
Pardon me?
It's more lyrical in a sense.
Well, a lot of it, yes. Especially the cavatinas, the first part. Remember, there's often a structure, a slow cavatina and then a cabaletta. Another feature of bel canto is when you repeat the same melody, that you actually ornament the second time around, sometimes a whole verse. Verdi actually wrote that in his writing of the same aria. So if you go a little later on into the aria, first time around, then we have to repeat.
So would it be that sometimes the melody itself will repeat and sometimes the words or lyrics associated with it too, or is it usually just the melody?
Oh no, it's the words. Definitely, the words repeat. Hence, perhaps you could rationalize the need to do an embellishment, since you're just saying the same words over and over again. And that is an important part of the bel canto style. And Verdi definitely fell into that. If you're familiar with Rigoletto, in the first act duet between Gilda and the Duke, they say addio, goodbye. I would venture to say in this one cabaletta of the duet, probably 25 times.
Why do you think that this started, this whole need for repetition within opera that in earlier periods of works didn't exist?
Well, they did. I mean, Mozart, you can find a lot of the same repetition in Mozart as well, and even in Handel. Handel was even more challenging. See, this whole bel canto style with repeating of text is always a challenge for stage directors, because, you know, how unnatural is that for you to come back and say exactly the same thing again? If you go back to Handel, they had what we call an A-B-A form. So in the A form, you express one feeling, then B, something else happens, or you're talking about some other aspect of your situation. But then you have to go back to the first one that you were talking about. You know, we live our lives, time continues, and there they actually have to go back. After they've left, they have to come back. They've left the original thought. In the bel canto style, usually it will express the thought, one thought, a more lyrical thought perhaps, and then there'll be some little interlude where maybe a character will come in and give them some new information, and then they'll sing a fast part. It was maybe some ornaments. Well, a good example is in the first act aria, her first act aria, Leonora, in her cabaletta, she expresses a happiness that in a different way than she does at the beginning of the aria. So, and it's also very ornate. All those trills were her singing. And then, that's very bel canto.
So is it up to all the embellishments that a singer may do, is that up to their discretion, or is that usually somehow driven in the right direction?
So way back when, in the times of Bellini and Donizetti and Rossini, although the composers didn't always love this, but the singers were the rock stars. So they would embellish at their whim and write extra notes, especially in repeats or extra cadenzas, based on what they felt showed their voices off the most. As time went on, Verdi, you don't hear a whole lot of extra embellishment in Verdi. He writes the embellishments in. So it's tradition that you sing exactly what's on the page and let Verdi make his own liberties.
Do you feel that the culture of going to see a specific soprano or a specific tenor is still true in opera today, or do you think that kind of culture has dwindled a little bit as opera has progressed in time?
Well, as there are different periods of the progression of opera. There were before it was the singers, then the conductors, the Toscanini and Beecham, and then of course even into Fancarian, and these conductors became the stars. There were still great operatic stars, the Pavarottis and the Joan Sutherlands and Leontine Prices. They were there, but even now, beginning past their time, the stage directors became the driving forces for the productions. And so it's not that we don't have, our Renee Flemings, but it's not so much the same rock star status for the singers as it used to be. It just isn't. And
as it was in the 18th or 19th century.
Right. I mean, even to the point there was one great singer who would travel with a suitcase of her own parts to substitute an aria that she wanted to sing rather than the one that the composer wrote.
Oh my goodness.
Which might express basically the same feeling, or, but it just, she liked it better. It suited her more. They had that much power, the singers back then.
Wow, thanks for all that great information, Robin. So far, we have talked about Verdi, whether Il Trovatore is considered a bel canto, and the rock star status of opera singers in the 18th century. Stay tuned next month for part 2, where we talk about the shocking moments in the show and what makes it so musically challenging.